It's time for more custom cards, and this time around, they're big, they're enormous, they're gigantic, but they're not colossal. Colossal minions as the keyword got announced shortly after I asked for submissions for this video. So these minions are really, really big. They're not colossal. That was just a coincidence there. But in fact, these are often way bigger than colossal minions, which is pretty dang cool. Like this card, Dark Titan Sargeras from Magic Milk. This is a 10 mana 30/30 demon for Warlock with taunt and can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So clearly when you get this down, gonna be a big friction point. And it reads, can only enter the field if this is your last card. So the only way to get Dark Titan Sargeras in play is if you've already gotten rid of everything else. So all the cards out of your deck and hand, and probably even battlefield as well, using that sort of Mechathune condition. And you might say, well, hey, Mechathune's just a win. Dark Titan Sargeras just kind of sits there on board. You're right. So in Wild, this probably wouldn't get played a lot, but in Standard, this could still be kind of an end game tool as that big bomb once you got into the bottom of your deck, depending on what Standard meta you're in. Maybe Questline's still better for now. And I like this card a lot because it solves one big problem that we're going to talk about in this video a few times, which is that it's really hard to print these gigantic statted minions in Hearthstone because of ways to either randomly summon them or cheese them into the battlefield a little sooner than you otherwise might. Think about, say, like Barnes style effects, and then Resurrects, you've got like 30/30s on board on turn 5 or something. That can be an issue. So this one says the only way this can enter the field is if it's your last card. So you're not going to be able to cheese this into play sooner. And a few cards in this video will not have similar conditions, which will be an issue. So keep that in mind as we get through some of these. They didn't quite solve that problem all that elegantly, so you have to rely perhaps on other cards not enabling that brokenness. But I think this was a really clean way to do that, and it feels cool as this like ultimate finisher, Dark Titan Sargeras. This bomb is coming down at the end of the game. If you've ran out of every other option, you can unleash Sargeras on your opponents. That's a really cool feeling, and I think because of the can't be targeted and taunt, he's really forcing the game to be about him, which is really, really cool. So I think this did a great job of making a gigantic minion that actually feels fair. Next up here is a really cool design, and I had to include it in the video. This one's from Starbird 1002, and you'll notice there's a whole little game board here he designed. This is Volesh of the Void, a 7-mana 8/8 for Warlock again. Start of game, open the Chasm, and the Chasm just takes a spot here on your board. My head is basically in the Chasm at this point. And then destroy 7 of your minions with the Chasm to summon a 20/20 horror with Rush. And indeed, there's your Eldritch Abomination, the 20/20 with Rush. So I love this, like, manipulating the board state. And as you can read from the text here, you can spend 1 mana to drag a minion into the Chasm and destroy it. So you're trading it, but instead of trading it to your deck, you're trading it with the Void. I think that's a really, really cool idea. Basically, you spend them 7 mana over the course of the game, you're going to get this awesome 20/20, but it comes at the cost of your own minions, which could be bad, of course. Like in this case, trading out a 2/3 maybe doesn't feel all that good. But if you have, say, like egg effects, death rattles you want to activate, this could be a bonus way to activate those. This does use the phrase destroy it, so I'm assuming death rattles would go off. You could also maybe make it consume the minion so there's no death rattle upside if you think that's better for the sake of balance. But nonetheless, this is just such a cool design. I would love to see things like this in Hearthstone. I think these are the kinds of evolutions we need for the game to really feel fresh. So happy to hear thoughts on this one because I think it is freaking cool. So next up here is Deathwing Power Incarnate from Turtle of Interest, a 10 mana 60/60. Now this is what we're talking about. This is a big minion. This puts colossal minions to shame. It reads, at the end of your turn, attack your hero, then attack the enemy hero. So the idea here is if you can get up to 61 health, this is a great way to finish off your opponent as long as they don't also have 61 health, because you need to get above that 60 attack threshold in order to survive this attack from Deathwing, and then it becomes this cool finisher. So in a lot of ways, it's like get enough armor, play enough defensive style, and this is your OTK built in to a single card. And I'll admit, 60 health here is a pretty scary threshold. I feel like there's a lot of Control Warrior games where I've gotten to 60 health fairly reliably. You can do a lot of like cheap armor stuff. Hanging on to it as you pass the turn, or, you know, getting into the point where you can spend 10 mana on Deathwing might be a little harder, but you know, I'd feel safer at like 70, 80. That's where this would start to feel a little more balanced to me. 60 makes me nervous. Anything less than 60 would definitely be far too easy to achieve and hold, I think, in a lot of matchups. But I like that this card also solves the problem of cheating it into play, because if you cheat this into play early, you try some way to summon this on turn 5, you're probably going to die to it before your opponent does. So this is another nice solution to that cheesing it out early problem, and I think this is a really fun card. I love the idea of rewarding all this armor gain with some awesome big finisher. Balance and numbers aside, I'm a little iffy about, but the execution of this idea is really cool. Real quick, before we move on, let's talk about our sponsor for this video, Keeps. Yeah, if you didn't know, 2 out of 3 guys will experience some form of hair loss by the time they're 35, much like Hearthstone. Sometimes the odds are against you, but the best time to do something about it is while you still have hair left. With Keeps, you don't need to go to the doctor's office for a hair loss prescription. You can talk to one online, and they'll send it right to your door, making it as easy and convenient as ever. So if you're noticing that you're losing your hair, for a limited time, you can go to keeps.com/Regis for 50% off your first order. Moving on here to Mana Golem from Captain Crime Time. This is a 7 mana 1/1. It's an elemental with taunt, and it reads Battlecry gain +2/+2 for each of your unspent mana this game. So this minion solves the problem of cheating out early by starting small and gaining its stats off Battlecry. That's a tried and true solution here. And I really like the idea of turning your unspent mana into big, crazy stuff, particularly in a world nowadays with like Guff, where I've had a lot of Guff turns where I finish 7-8 mana just chilling without a lot to do because you just kind of run out of stuff you want to play, and suddenly in one turn that converts to like, I don't know, 14 and extra stats on this guy. As you start to stack that up over the course of the game, you could easily see how this guy becomes enormous. He's kind of got that like Ivis vibe to him, but you know, long term as opposed to all at once. And I think that's awesome. The idea of dropping like a 50-50 mana golem at the end of a game and being like, just figure it out, dude. I don't know. Yeah, sure. Maybe you have some very efficient single target removal, of course. But if you don't, I'm going to whack you with a 50-50 mana golem. And that sounds awesome. And I love the idea of that. And this kind of rewards you playing slower styles, which of course is something I'm always looking for in Hearthstone. Next up here is Argus the Unmaker, a 10 mana 45/45. I love how big it is. Battlecry, destroy all friendly minions and discard all cards from your hand and deck. So this one is another one of those, like, I'm going all in, I'm discarding everything, but if this 45 can connect, I'm probably going to win the game most of the time if you can't answer it, which against certain matchups, you know, it's possible that this could take. Like, you're playing a more aggro deck that's not running hard removal. Yeah, this might just be enough to kind of take that one turn gamble and say, no, I'm all in. Don't have a 1/1 taunt or I'm screwed. But if you can't, I'm just going to win the game next turn. Now, this card does not have a built-in way to protect against cheesing. I mentioned there were going to be a few of those. So this one's a little bit reliant on a meta existing where you can't somehow cheat out at 45/45. That's always a bit of a downside here, but it's hard to design every design around those sorts of things. So I'm still cool with this one as being an all-in. Like, I'm discarding everything. I'm wiping my board. Let's go. Make or break. This is going to either win me or lose me the game. I like those big, decisive sorts of moments. Moving on here to Blood-Linked Balnazar. This one's from Cirques. It's a 10 mana 30/30 demon. And he has -1/-1 for each health your hero is missing. So his health is indeed linked, or his stats even are linked to your health, which is a very fitting and flavorful thing for Warlock. I like that a lot. And with this one, in fact, you want to have a lot of health, because as you suffer, he seems to suffer because you lose stats. I'll say, if it were me, I might actually swap this. I might say he has +1/+1 for each health your hero is missing, and he starts at a lower value of stats. Like, he starts as a 1/1 and then he gains as you're missing health, basically to give you this kind of recovery tool. It's like, yeah, hit me really hard if you want, but I'm going to drop a bomb of a big dude and hit you in the face, kind of in that Molten Giant vein. This is almost more of a win more card that rewards you being healthy and successful, which might not be as important. If you're at 30 health, do you need this guy necessarily? You've probably done well throughout the course of the game. This might feel like overkill at that point. Whereas if this gave you that swing potential, that recovery potential, I think that could be pretty cool. There would also be some interesting aspects where your opponent is like rewarded for healing you to make this guy smaller. There's some cool interactions that could happen there. Whereas with this one, they're encouraged to still just hit you in the face because this guy's gonna get smaller along the way. So, if you're basically at 10 health and you play this guy, your opponent's like, oh, I don't care. I'm just gonna hit you and put you to 3, and then he's a nobody, right? He's not that big or scary. So I like the idea of the connection here between the health totals and stats, but I would flip it. I think you have a much more interesting card that's perhaps more rewarding and more interactive in a lot of game states. Next up, here's Magtheridon, the Cursed Lord from KSK, a big old 10 mana 30 demon. A lot of these are demons, which I'm cool with. It reads, whenever you play a card, this gains +5/+5. Whenever the opponent plays a card, this loses -5/-5 wherever it is. I'm going to go ahead and assume the wherever it is clause here applies to both of these sentences, not just the second sentence, even though it is inside that period. Otherwise, it would just be losing stats throughout the entire course of the game, and it would basically be a 0/0, and it would be very hard for you to ever buff it. So basically, this is kind of a tug-of-war card. Whoever's playing more stats is going to end up on the right side of Magtheridon, or playing more cards is going to end up on the right side of Magtheridon. So if you're spamming a bunch of stuff, this guy's going to keep eating 5/5 buffs. Maybe you play 10 cards, he gains 50/50, but your opponent's only played 6 cards. So he's only going to lose 30/30, which means, you've netted a 20/20 advantage here, and he's now an actual 50/50 at the end of it. And this is another card I might swap, actually. I think it'd be more interesting if this was a punish for your opponent playing a lot of cards. If this was a way to counter spammy decks, so that if every time they played a card, they're like, oh no, I'm buffing the Magtheridon. That's going to come down so big. Can I deal with the Magtheridon? That might be a more interesting design on this one as a counter, or a little bit more interactive. In this case, both players just want to play as many things as they can. And that's a little bit less interesting to me, right? There's no like kind of back and forth or thought, or like, man, should I hold my resources here just to be safe? I think that becomes a more interesting design. But nonetheless, I like the idea of this tug and war and back and forth and card that's kind of based on both players' actions. I think that's a really cool element to this one. So next up's a crazy card. This one's from Chegwin. It's a 10 mana 1/1 elemental taunt and battle cry. For each other elemental you've played this game, double Therazane's stats. Dude, doubling is a scary thing. I'm sure somebody in the comments will do the math for you, but it doesn't take much to make this thing freaking enormous, like crazy big, right? And particularly in Shaman, where playing elementals is something they like doing very often anyway, this just becomes absurd. I mean, it becomes like meaningless after a while. Like after it's 100 or something, does it really matter? Of course not, right? But thousands of stats, absolutely possible with Therazane without too much trouble. So I don't know if there's a better way to do this, like doubling, you can't say multiply it by 1.5. That sounds kind of silly. Doubling is definitely elegant, but maybe it's like for each elemental you've played that costs more than 5 or something, some sort of limiter, so that it doesn't quite double out to insanity quite so easily. But nonetheless, I do like the idea of just feeding up Therazane and making her bigger and bigger over the course of the game. This is an excessive way to do that, but it's capturing something pretty cool. Having this gigantic elemental bomb, the elemental lord finally comes down, and you've just pumped it up and built it up so much over the course of the game. It's like, oh my god, look at that thing. It's huge. And then finally here we have the Deep Tide Kraken. This one would have fit nicely in Voyage of the Sunken City, but I think it was submitted before that was revealed. It's a 9 mana 20/20 beast with Battlecry. Draw cards until your hand is full. then lose 4 attack or health for each card drawn. So this can either be a really big minion if you don't have a lot of hand space and you just want to play a big thing. Maybe it's only going to draw you 1 card, and note that says attack or health. So it might be like a 16-20 or a 20-16 if you only draw 1 card. Or alternatively, if you don't care about the size of the minion, you can use this as a gigantic hand reload, sort of in the vein of like Malagos, drawing you a bunch of cards. Malagos, of course, drawing spells, but then he's going to be really small. If you draw 8 cards with this, right, you're in total losing 32 stats out of a 40 stat minion. So he's going to come down, it's like a 4/4 basically, which would still probably be reasonable for a lot of decks. It's just a full hand reload, but I like that there is some counterplay here. It is worth noting, of course, that if you draw 10 cards, if you play him on an empty hand, he will be summoned as a 0/0, and there's some risk that he could lose all health. Even if you only draw like 5 cards, you could low roll and he'd lose health 5 times in a row and still die being summoned as a 20/0. So I do like that. Something about this feels like it's just too good, the fact that it can draw so many cards. I like that there's that counterbalance to it. I'm not sure how to fix that problem. Maybe it starts smaller, or maybe it always loses health. There's maybe some kind of balance tweak here I'd take. Nonetheless, I think there's a lot to like about this card. Another nicely done big minion with some notable downside, or at least thought that goes into playing it. And yeah, there you go. That wraps it up for our gigantic minions. They are not colossal. They're gigantic, though, and they're awesome. And it's fun to figure out ways to make these things reasonable and not just instantly game-winning. And I think a lot of great designs here achieve that. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts, though, in the comments below. Thanks much, as always, for watching. And until next time, game on.